to say أنا بحب مصر، أنا بحب عربي، لكن عربي صعب قوي. عشان كده أنا هتكلم إنجليزي. Otherwise it would be the shortest presentation ever. I know the topic is informed consent, and I will be touching upon informed consent, but Mossad has also asked me to introduce the idea of a new service to the Middle East, which we want to launch, which is the introduction of mobile research nursing into the region. Just a few points on informed consent. It's been really interesting from a cultural point of view to listen to all the different countries speak. Obviously, I'm based in the UK, and we are lucky that we speak the international language. But having said that, especially in cardiovascular trials, there are a lot of Asians in the UK and a lot of Asians with cardiovascular disease. So I have been involved, my background was cardiovascular nursing. I've done many studies with purely Asian populations, so we also have to consider having translated informed consent documents for certain Asian languages. The other thing that's important, and there's a rise, and this all comes with the patient centricity, is lay writing. It's all very well having a very robust scientific consent form, but if patients can't understand the language behind it, then it's not a very good consent form. So what many companies, including ourselves, are doing now is, for example, with children, is asking a group of children, do you understand this document? And how would you change the language so that you can understand it and it's not overly scary? And also translations. It's really important that when you translate a document, you don't translate it literally. For example, in English, the word stool, it could mean a backless chair, or it could also mean feces. So you have to be very careful what language you use and how you use it. And more now, with the advent of more and more patient-centric approaches to trials, there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies looking at doing more virtual trials now, more off-site trials. I don't ever think we'll get to a situation where doctors and nurses will be replaced by robots, but I do think that there is definitely it's a good idea to make these trials a bit more patient-friendly, and I imagine there will be a hybrid where there'll still be hospital visits, but there'll be plenty of off-site. There's lots of things like e-consent now that they want to introduce, and technology, which I think we'll see coming. Just when I did a Google search on clinical trials, on patient centricity, it came up with 888,000 hits on the term patient centricity. I don't know how many around this room have heard it, but certainly in my neck of the woods, it's a very hot topic. I think it's really important as we grow, and certainly for this region. I used to specialise in the emerging markets, which at the time was Central and Eastern Europe, which is now very much emerged. And I see the Middle East and the Far East as more of the emerging markets. The more that we can do to make patient enrolment easier, patient retention more attractive, I think it's better for everybody concerned. So when I talk about mobile research nursing, predominantly it means at home, but we don't want to call it home nursing, and the reason for that is a lot in the US, and I know they do it to some extent in Egypt. They have private nurses that go to the patients, maybe the richer patients' homes, to give them baths or change their dressings or whatever. This is purely for clinical research, it's just for trials. So we call it mobile because we work a lot in rare diseases. It lends itself very well to many different indications, both in paediatrics and adults. And we've worked in some ultra rare diseases where patients are seen in different countries. They're on holiday, but they don't want to lose them, so we have a nurse goes and sees them while they're on holiday. Just some of the considerations for you. I know that when you're thinking about starting a new service, there's lots of pushback. We've had it a lot. We set up in Australia. We had the same pushback, mainly from the R&D departments that are involved in making sure financially it makes sense for the trials to be run in the hospitals. But at the end of the day, there are a number of big pharmaceutical companies now that are really embracing the idea of making much more flexible protocols so that a lot of the visits can be done off-site. Of course, we did have a question, can your nurses do CT scans at home? Well, no, clearly the answer is no. And they wouldn't do things like biopsies. The nurses will only do what nurses would do in a hospital. Again, something that I'm very passionate about, my colleague Yasser, who's based in Cairo, we want to do some free GCP training for nurses that are interested in getting into clinical research. The nurses that we have at the moment are very, very experienced clinical research nurses, but also I'm very keen to talk to the nursing, the universities that are setting up the nursing qualifications to try and get clinical research on their modules of their training. I think one interesting thing is that hardly anybody mentioned research nurses today, and certainly it's in the informed consent process where I come from, the research nurses are absolutely key. They have the time to explain things, whereas the investigators tend to come in and just witness the signature. Clearly, if you make, we work a lot in things like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where there could be 27 clinical trials in that area with only a limited number of patients. If pharmaceutical company A makes their study so difficult that they have to go for every single PK or twice weekly subcutaneous injections back to site when you're really quite ill and you might have children and other siblings to look after and work to consider. And then you've got pharmaceutical company B that makes it a lot easier so that half the visits can be done at home. Then surprise, surprise, the next time they want to go into a trial, they might consider that pharmaceutical company B is more attractive to them. And by allowing patients to have this flexibility, it means that they don't drop out as easily, and then you can get your drug to market, which ultimately means that you get money in the bank. And how the mobile research nursing works is part of the informed consent process, and every country has a different way of approving the nurse or approving the service. But it has to be written into the informed consent, has to be written into the protocol, into the schedule of events. It is not a mandatory service, so if patients want to go back to site or they want their children to go back to site, absolutely no problem whatsoever. But we tend to find we work in things like acute stroke where they've just come out of hospital and they certainly don't want to go back in. So that has worked extremely well. The nurses are sign the delegation log, so they become part of the study site. I know that every country is different, but in many of the countries we work in, we have to get the ethics committee will actually approve the research nurse themselves, or it might be they have a research passport, or it might be in countries in the Middle East that as long as the PI is happy, then and the ethics committee have approved the study, which has the mobile element written in, then that would be enough for the nurse to be approved. The nurses always meet the study site, because if the study site don't get on with the research nurse and vice versa, it won't work. They are an adjunct to the study site. And it's really, this is one of the most critical things when you're setting up a new service, that it is not a them and us situation. We are not taking work away from you. I'm speaking to you in English, I'm from the UK, but I'm certainly not going to tell you how your healthcare system works. That's why I have people like Yasser and I work with people like Mossad, because I don't know how the system works in all of these countries. I'm very mindful of sensitive and cultural issues that I may not be aware of. We always visit the patients in the hospital before they go off site, so the first time that we see them at home is not the first time that they've ever seen the nurse. It gives the children or the mothers, fathers, whoever, opportunity to understand how the service works, the fact that the courier will come and collect some blood, that we carry a centrifuge with us and all the rest of it. Anything that a research nurse can do at the hospital can be done at the patient's home. So bloods are very common, IMP, we've done first in mal in oncology, we've done chemotherapy in the home, we've done subcutaneous infusions, pretty much anything you can think of. We cover the whole world. These are just some of our paediatric materials. I think the small things are really important. It's important that children understand that they are part of a trial and they feel that when they've achieved something when they've had their visit. So perception and reality, I've only got 3 seconds, but safety of the patient always comes first.
Dear doctor, your time is up.
So irrespective, we will always make sure that it's a safe environment, that it's been approved by the ethics committee, that the site and the patient are happy with everything. And so the perception it sometimes can be, oh, it's a nurse, they're not as well trained. And there's the other, don't worry about the slides, it's fine. And then the second one is revenue. So it may or may not be an issue in this country or in the MENA region, but certainly in some of the more Western countries, money is absolutely key to the sites. They say, well, if you do half of the visits off site, then we're going to lose half of our revenue. Well, the short answer is that we've done a new study in Duchenne muscular dystrophy where 50% of the patients dropped out. We put the nursing service in place, nobody dropped out. After 2 years, there was 0 dropout. So that way, you wouldn't lose revenue because you wouldn't be dropping patients like flies. And the other thing is that you can put more patients in. If you're a hard-working doctor or you've studied sites, you can start to enrol more patients because you know that the burden is going to be taken off you. So I feel really passionate about this service and the introduction into this region. And I would just say, if anybody's interested, we've got literature, happy to talk to anybody, really want to learn about everybody's individual countries and how it's set up, because the most important thing is that we do it right. So thank you for your time.